What's going on, everyone? John Matrix here. Hope you're all having yourselves a wonderful day wherever you're at and whenever you're watching this. We're going to be jumping into some more Kaiserreich history here as we continue with this Kaiserreich Universe Documentary series by Kaiserreich Cinema. We're going to be checking out part 2 here today. Kaiserreich Universe Documentary episode 02, Commune of France, 1917 to 1923. Links will be down below in the description as always to the original video without my commentary and reaction, and to Kaiserreich Cinema's channel here. If you enjoy this video as we go through it, go give it a like, and if you enjoy the content on Kaiserreich Cinema's channel, give the man a sub. If you'd like to join us when we do these reactions live, as we are right now with my YouTube members, there is a join button underneath the video, as well as a link in the description to the YouTube membership benefits and tiers that I offer. If you've been around the channel for a while and decide you want to take your support to the next level, check them out and see if any of that would have any interest for you. But with all that said, let's get into this here video. So we're going into episode number 2 in this documentary series, Commune of France, 1917 to 1923. This is about how Germany, or what if Germany had won World War I in this Kaiserreich universe. Let's do it.
This video was sponsored by ourselves. To fund our content, we built a spin-off alt history flag designer called Flag Maker and Print. More about that after the video. Thank you for watching and enjoy the show, cats.
Paris, 1919. The doors to the historic Hotel Ritz, located in the heart of the City of Lights, are wide open. People run in and out freely, soldiers mixing with girls on the street, red banners and bedsheets hung outside, printed with inverted red chevrons, hammers, and torches. A year ago, many were still fighting the German invaders in the fields of northern France, sent to die in desperate counteroffensives, untold numbers of men lost to the folly of war. Some, finally, had had enough and began resisting the orders sent out by an out-of-touch high command. Repression was harsh and ultimately futile. When unrest among French workers grew, the bourgeois government sued for peace. The war was lost, and a humiliating peace was soaked in the blood of a sacrificed generation. The hated 1919 Versailles Treaty would be the herald of an age of revolution. The repressed labor and soldier classes of France had finally had enough. Strained by reparations and wartime debt, they rose up in a popular revolt to replace the rotten French Third Republic. Today, Paris is in the hands of those revolutionaries, signaling the start of an unstoppable tide of liberation. Here in the capital of France, where once the idea of monarchy was toppled, this spark of revolutionary fervor will light a signal fire to echo across borders, cultures, and horizons. Here, the torch and gear are lit for generations to come. The end of the war will not bring peace, but the seeds to another war. France will rise to challenge Germany again one day. There can be no doubt about it. There will be a second Weltkrieg.
Foreshadowing. So, I mean, at this point in like this what if scenario, Germany's in a pretty good spot, right? Like they've created a buffer zone on the front with Russia after a Russia civil war had taken place, I believe, if I'm remembering this alternate history correctly. But they have like a buffer zone that's going on there that's allowed them to concentrate more on the Western front of things. And then on top of that, the American supplies have stopped after the British accidentally, sunk an American civilian ship instead of it being the Germans in this alternate history. So supplies for America have essentially stopped, which has basically isolated France and the United Kingdom, and now Germany's been able to completely focus their war effort on France, and France has now collapsed. So yeah, Russia's falling apart. They forced France to surrender. Britain is kind of side-eyeing the whole situation, right? So I mean, France is now collapsed. They've taken France, and it's basically just going to be Britain and the United Kingdom, you know, against what's left.
It is often said that the French syndicalist revolution started in the streets of Paris. In truth, it began in the trenches. After nearly 3 years of unrelenting war and amid the worst conditions imaginable,
I mean, yeah, people can only take so much.
In France's wartime unity began to appear in 1917.
Like, people can only take so much war and battle for so long and take so many losses before things need to change. And if you can't change that, then you're going to start having situations like you're talking about with mutinies and people refusing to fight, etc., etc.
In May that year, a series of small mutinies, miraculously undetected by the Germans, broke out along French lines. Tired of suicidal offensives, their morale cratered by repeated failures and mounting losses, the soldiers refuse offensive orders. Despite government attempts to suppress the news, trains full of coffins and stories return to the home front.
That's got to be depressing too, man. Like, can you imagine that? Can you imagine being the people that have to offload trainfuls of coffins and bury them and then, you know, send the information to their families? No, thank you. No, thank you. That has got to be one of the worst jobs imaginable.
Losing the war. The once unquestionable morale of the French army now lies in doubt, and the idea of looming defeat sends shockwaves through the nation. 4 months later, the Union Sacrée, a political truce which has long united France's right and left wings, finally collapses. From the front lines to the home front, France is divided for the first time since the start of the war. Parliamentary control of the army is put into question, and the reigning government, led by the unpopular Paul Penlevé, is forced to resign. He is replaced by the fiery Georges Clemenceau, promising a way out of the war. The government can only do so much, however, as France sinks ever deeper into wartime debts, and another crushing blow for the morale of the Entente allies is right around the corner. The year 1918 brings only bad news.
Yeah, exactly.
Russia, a loyal ally of the Entente under the Tsar's government, already shaken by a democratic revolution in 1917, sees the Republican government of Alexander Kerensky toppled after a popular revolution by the Bolsheviks. These radical leftist groups gather to form a new People's Republic, colloquially referred to as Soviet Russia. While pockets of white resistance continue through the motherland, the Soviets move to sign a separate peace with the Central Powers. Strained and pushed to the brink of national collapse, Lenin's new Soviet government is forced to cede enormous amounts of Eastern Europe to the Kaiser and his allies.
So, I mean, that gives Germany a huge buffer zone should Russia ever decide to actually invade, or if they decide to invade Russia. You know, they have territory that they could essentially lose if needed. But this is also just giving them the ability to fully focus on France and Britain.
The news is met in Berlin with celebrations, and a crushing blow is dealt to the Entente. Soldiers at the Western Front shudder because they know the Central Powers will be able to remobilize their enormous Eastern Front armies west, skewing the balance of power finally in favor of Germany and Austria. Some, however, are inspired by this revolutionary fervor. Perhaps an end to the war and a better world are right around the corner after all. Entente powers move to condemn the government of Soviet Russia as her revolutionary nature threatens the very foundation of the European apparatus of state. Germany knows it has inspired something dark and dangerous. But for now, the Kaiser is content claiming this victory and bringing all his armies to bear against the arrogant Western Entente. In France, crushing news of Russia's surrender is followed by the failure of General Foch's great Western offensive, which grinds to a halt by the end of June. France throws the full weight of the French army against German lines, setting the front ablaze from the Argonne forest to the sea. A few weeks later, however, the French army has nothing to show beyond an ever-lengthening list of casualties. Minor territorial gains are made around Lille, but these come at the staggering cost of over 200,000 lives. Despite progress by British troops in the Middle East, news reaches France and Britain that Romania and Greece have collapsed, putting an end to the last remnants of Entente resistance in the East. Slowly, the formidable alliance crumbles as she is ground down by the Central Powers, bolstered by America's refusal to enter the war or allow Paris and London to accrue further debt.
The government censors could not keep this truth from us. We had lost Romania. We had lost Dunkirk. We had lost Russia and Greece. And most of all, we had lost brothers, slaughtered by the hundreds of thousands, dead on the fields of Europe. For what? What could we ever have to gain from this Armageddon? What hope is left for France as the German hordes stand outside our gates?
A second wave of mutinies begins on the heels of Foch's offensive, larger than the first, and amid the war's first major labor strikes, calls for revolution are heard. In Paris and Lyon, production lines grind to a halt in armaments factories, and metro lines are blocked for a week. Logistical arteries vital to the war effort are disrupted. For a short while, it seems the workers' voices must be heard.
I mean, the country literally came to a standstill, it sounds like, during this time, you know? The workers basically stopped working and they made it impossible for the government to do anything. Couldn't manufacture anything. They couldn't get any weapons of war out to any of their lines, you know? What can you really do at that point other than capitulate to what the masses are wanting? You know what I'm saying? Yeah, the quotes are a nice touch. Yeah.
But once again, the mutinies are suppressed and the strikes broken.
It's so interesting too, like, I mean, it's a different time and communication obviously is very different at that point. They didn't even have radios yet. So like, but it is interesting that they were able to suppress such a mass kind of uprising like this.
Their principal agitators labeled Soviet spies. Although Prime Minister Georges Clemenceau and his radical independent party are convinced that the war can still be won, the protests' continued suppression disguises a population increasingly pushed to the breaking point. By the end of the year, life on the home front becomes ever more difficult, as French cities are plagued with famine and lack of basic resources. Slowly, it becomes clear to broad swathes of French society that victory could come at a price too high to pay. The first anti-war protests, led by socialist forces, begin on December 8th. The government attempts a harsh crackdown, but it doesn't stop the protesters from widely distributing pacifist pamphlets, copies of La Vie ouvrière specially written for the occasion. The wave of protests spreads to other French cities, and soon, even the front lines are contaminated by revolutionary pacifist slogans.
Amis, ouvrières, brothers, why do we fight? Why do we die? What happens if we win? Will it bring bread to the table? Improve our lives? Shorten the workdays? We struggle and die in trenches, so we may struggle and die in factories, in victory. What has the elite promised us after the war? Not the nation, not France. What have the elite said they will do for us? I hear silence. That is because they have led us to war with vague promises and blagues. Servir la patrie est une moitié du devoir. To serve the homeland is half of duty. But to serve humanity is the other half. People of France, let us throw away our weapons and this meaningless slaughter and focus on improving the lives of the common man. If the elites want their war, they can fight it themselves. For us, faisons la guerre à la guerre. Let's do war against war.
And I mean, like, also too, like the type of warfare that was going on, the trench warfare during World War I was just so brutal too. Because I mean, it's like literally gaining territory by like inches, of just shoving numbers at enemy lines and taking what you can and then retrenching. So like people were like the amount of senseless deaths really that happened because of the tactics that had to be used at the time. It's just crazy. It's just crazy. And then yeah, you top that off with what she's saying, that, you know, what are they fighting for? What will victory actually bring us that defeat isn't going to bring us? You know, is it going to make our lives any better? Are we going to have any kind of real change? What's life going to look like after this war, whether we win or lose? And they don't have an answer for them.
On the eve of 1919, France sits on the edge of collapse.
I mean, is it any wonder,
folding to mutinies and desertion, many analysts fear a single blow may end the war for good. And then, the Germans launch their spring offensive. In March of 1919, the German spring offensive smashes through French lines at Saint-Mihiel, encircling Verdun, and reaches as far as Nancy. Despite an Allied counterattack, Amiens falls by the end of the month, and a wedge is driven between the French and British armies. As communication and supply lines are cut, all pretense of joint leadership ceases, and the British begin a fighting retreat to the sea. French forces watch in terror as their British allies turn their heels and make a run for the coast, where they may be transferred safely to the British Isles. France is now truly alone. The framework of wartime patriotism and propaganda, which for years bridged the nation's long-standing divisions, begins to collapse. Prominent leftist organizations like the SFIO, France's Socialist Party, openly call for an end to the war, and are soon echoed by radical groups within France's largest union, the CGT. They are met in Parliament by furious accusations of treachery and defeatism, but to no avail. Massive strikes attempt to stop the French army's desperate...
I mean, like, that's just a rough position to be in for the French at this point, because, like, it's just a lose-lose scenario no matter what happens. And it just seems inevitable that they're going to be, you know, taken over by the Germans. You know, the citizens are tired of war. They don't have anything really to fight for. And the unrest is, you know, breaking their unification and just making it that much easier for the Germans to come in and take them over. Really, what else can be done, you know? That's just a tough position to really be in.
Attempts at a counteroffensive, which breaks upon the German army, driving ever deeper into the French heartland.
Because, like, even like when you're trying to do what he's talking about right now, trying to make a counteroffensive, like, the morale of your troops is already so low. And I'm sure they're getting letters and things from, you know, people at home telling them about what's going on. They don't want to fight at this point, right? So trying to mount a counteroffensive is going to be kind of a twofold problem, right? Like, A, you're trying to, you know, fight against an enemy, but you're also having to fight against the morale and the fact that your soldiers don't want to fight anymore.
A political war is waged in Paris. Only a small counteroffensive at the Marne and a temporary shift of German attention to the rapidly collapsing Italian front keeps the real fighting a mere 50 kilometers from the capital. The sound of German artillery can be heard in the streets of Paris as Clemenceau's government, blamed for their defeat in the war, resigns. Soon this unrest spreads to major cities all over France. The French military, despite rapidly collapsing support on the home front, are convinced that their enemy must be equally desperate, that the German lines, so close to the capital, must represent an opponent overextended and driven to the breaking point. Clemenceau's successor, Gaston Doumergue, makes a frantic national radio appearance calling for one last push, one last great sacrifice.
See, and that's the thing, man. Like, you're already positioned to where, like, how can you really ask that from your people? You know what I mean? That's tough.
The general's last offensive begins on the 22nd of June, aiming to drive the Germans from the Parisian region.
I'm sure there are probably still some, like, really hardcore soldiers that's what they're down for, but the majority of the populace at this point sounds like they're ready to move on, and they're tired of war, and are ready to kind of sign some kind of treaty, whatever that happens to be, with Germany.
In order to secure a respectable peace, French forces muster around Paris on the verge of despair in an attempt to break the overextended German lines. Historical irony would later reveal that Dumerge's gamble was not wrong. The Germans were indeed overextended and exhausted, perhaps as much as the French were, and a successful counteroffensive may have secured a white peace at this point. However, labor unrest, crushed morale, and the beginnings of a new wave of mutinies grinds the offensive to a halt after early successes.
It no longer mattered why the war had started, only that it would not stop. Our thoughts turned to the great machine of war, to the ones who had built it, to those who had let it grind a whole generation to dust. What its creators had not foreseen was the machine's true product. By 1919, the war had turned us into revolutionaries.
The army attempts to crack down on the mutineers once more, but it is too late. Some units are only under nominal control and refuse to budge. A nationwide general strike heralds the end of France's Third Republic. The only option now is surrender or collapse.
Yeah.
On August 10th, after weeks of battle, strikes, and mutinies, the French government, alarmed by the situation on the home front, admits the situation can't be controlled anymore and accepts an armistice. Belgium, now fully occupied, ceases to have a functional government and has no choice but to go along with the rest of the Entente. On the 12th of August 1919, the guns of the Great War finally fall silent. Negotiations for a bitter peace drag on. With winter approaching, the Treaty of Versailles is officially signed on November 6th. Representatives of the French, British, Portuguese, Belgian, Luxembourgish, and German nations sign a peace heavily favoring Germany. French radical pro-war proponents, now humbled twice by Germany, see their worst nightmares come to bear. France is pressured to sign the humiliating treaty by Britain, who feared the Republic would end up collapsing on itself, and in turn, weaken the United Kingdom. German diplomats make clever use of France's wartime debt position and offer to buy French colonies rather than demanding them outright. The French government agrees to sell off her African and Asian colonies for the entirety of her reparations, effectively cancelling any further costs to the peace. France, desperate as unrest grows even in the colonies, agrees to sell. Parts of metropolitan France are also lost to Germany. The Briey-Base.
I mean, that's smart, right? That gives the Germans more position throughout the world to expand. They're playing more of a long game, right? Because any kind of resources and whatnot that they can get from colonizing will further, enrich them in the future, while offsetting any kind of uprising or helping to appease the French to help mitigate any kind of uprising that could happen. Smart tactic to offer them that kind of an out instead of demanding they just give up all territories.
Longwy and the western slope of the Vosges are occupied by the Kaiser. These territorial losses are comparatively small, but many are furious. The citadel of Belfort, symbol of French resistance in the War of 1870, is now under the control of the German Empire. This disgrace would leave deep scars in the French national pride and slowly fester into an all-consuming desire to crush Germany for once and for all. France's humiliation is made even deeper as her colonial empire and overseas possessions are carved up. All of Central Africa and Indochina is handed over to Germany, as well as France's Chinese holdings and the Moroccan Protectorate. Germany also demands a demilitarization of the Nancy region and a destruction of French forts on the Belgian and German borders. French soldiers are forced to destroy the fortifications of Verdun, where they held the Germans in a bloody stalemate for years.
That's gotta be rough.
All the death and destruction was...
The thing is fascinating. I'll turn over the whole losing this war broke the nation spirit thing over to France. Yeah.
For naught. In this moment of national crisis, a hatred is lit in the hearts of the French people against the German occupiers, certainly, but also against her faltering government, incapable of winning the war and too proud to end it, selling France to the highest bidder as soon as their positions were threatened by the anger of the masses.
Yeah.
Standing on those hills.
If anything, it's going to spark a revolution, and anyone of any kind of significance in France is probably looking to hide somewhere.
With the corpses of our brothers, we swore expensive oaths. We would tear down the incompetence of the Republican government and create a better France to face this dark future. The crimes and humiliation brought upon us by the Boche would never be forgiven. Their endless murder would never be forgotten. There would come a day of reckoning, where France retook what was rightfully hers and put Germany to the torch for her arrogance and imperial ambition. That day would come, but first, we had to turn our attention to Paris, to remove the old government and to allow for new ideas to rise. More than a century ago, France was defeated by the Germans, and from her ashes rose a new republic that brought the Germans to her knees. We believed that once again, our people must rise up, just as our forefathers did in 1789 and in 1871. We believed in a new revolution. In this new age, we would force France to live up to her motto of equality, liberty, and brotherhood. Or perhaps, go further.
Say what you want about the French, man. They are definitely a proud nation. They are definitely a proud nation. And I mean, they have a long, rich history.
Resentment against the French government slowly boils to a fever pitch over the second half of 1919. The hated Treaty of Versailles brought an enormous economic downturn to France. Most of her colonial empire has now fallen into German hands, and the coal-rich northern region was either devastated or occupied by Germany. Even after the war, hunger continues to ravage the beaten nation. In this growing chaos, several political leaders appear on the forefront to voice France's resentment against her government. In massive rallies and speeches, they bash against the Treaty of Versailles and the archaic structures of governance and position that many say caused France's defeat. In this revolutionary atmosphere, several important factions rise up. The most significant development here is the reformation of France's largest workers' union, the CGT, or Confédération Générale du Travail. In 1919, this union is taken over by its syndicalist wing, called the CSR, or the Comité Syndicaliste Révolutionnaire. These radical syndicate socialists tap Pierre Monat as general secretary. Unlike the reformists...
So it's interesting, it sounds like socialism is starting to take a bigger picture in French society now.
...that dominated the unions during the war.
So it sounds like socialism might be growing in France as opposed to it being quite as big of a picture in Russia and coming from, you know, like a communist Russia thing. It could be like coming from France. Interesting.
Monat is an uncompromising revolutionary and calls for the establishment of a workers' state. He is met in the political arena by an old ally. Secretly, Monat begins talks with the Socialist Party of France, the so-called SFIO, or Section Française d'Internationale Ouvrière. This party, founded by the legendary Jean Jaurès, had taken a staunch pacifist stance in 1918, doing much to push for an end to the Great War. Perhaps less radical than the leadership of the CGT, the SFIO can still count on millions of voters across France and forms an important voice for socialism among the people. The CGT and the SFIO quickly see that their interests align and work together during these troubled years to form a united leftist front. At the other side of Europe, observers from these French revolutionaries see the failure of the Leninist Russian Revolution, where the Bolshevik front is now rapidly crumbling due to infighting. Distancing themselves from this failed communist theory, the new French United Left decides to fight for another type of socialism. This political union of workers' syndicates and socialist parties in France is soon given a new name: syndicalism. For this syndicalist front, the revolution will not be led by a vanguard, but by the masses. Organized locally in councils and unions, and supported by a broad front of proletarian organizations, the syndicalist state will not be left at the whims of a sole party, but will be organized democratically, with the representatives recallable, and the economy in the hands of unions, reminiscent of the Commune of Paris of 1871. At this point, it is obvious that the camarades of the CGT and the SFIO don't fully see eye to eye about the exact organization of this state, but for now, their burning desire to overthrow the bourgeois order is more than enough to keep France's revolutionary forces united. Across the border, these events are watched closely by Germany. The Kaiser, ever looking for ways to weaken his opponents and strengthen Germany's grip over Europe, begins funding the French syndicalists in secret. It is a move he would later come to regret. Bolstered by mysterious foreign benefactors,
it is a unique concept.
the CGT...
And that is a pretty big gamble, kind of essentially funding your enemies, hoping that they will essentially, you know, turn things in your favor, but obviously it's a gamble because you don't know how it's going to pay off.
And SFIO form a united front and attempt a first takeover of the government by forcing the Republican Parliament to her knees with a protracted general strike. Their unifying rally call becomes Tout ça pour rien? Or all this for nothing? The strikes would fail, but the outrage generated by the Treaty of Versailles rallies the protesters, joined by many who had once been far from revolutionary hopes. As soon as...
It is just very interesting seeing just how all these different things are reshaping the world in this, you know, what if scenario, how the Lenin uprising and all that stuff failed in Russia, so socialism and communism didn't take root over there, but now it seems to be taking root in France because of the French government having failed its citizens and not being able to actually protect them and defend them during the war, and then essentially selling France off to Germany to save their positions of power, you know, etc. It's fascinating.
As the German army leaves northern France, Lille and most of the Coal Belt rise up in open revolt and refuse the French Republican Army entry into the region. The protests rally around the humiliating treaty, spreading across the nation at breakneck speed, and the situation becomes rapidly untenable for Republican forces. By November the 12th, mutineering soldiers and syndicalist strikers throw up barricades in northeastern Paris. Armed police and military units are sent in, escalating the situation into insurrection, and finally, revolution. On November the 20th, protesters and soldiers storm the parliament. The rebels proclaim the creation of the revolutionary Commune of Paris. They raise a scarlet banner over the capital, and the government flees to Versailles. The news reaches the rest of the nation the day after. Hearing the call of the Paris Commune, workers and protesters from Lille organized to seize the city.
And I mean, the thing is, too, is like it makes some historical sense that this could easily have happened. You know, you have the workers and the common people who, you know, have essentially seen their sons and brothers and fathers being thrown out of war that they couldn't win. And, you know, countless numbers of people have died essentially for what they feel is nothing. They got nothing out of it, and only to have the people in power then sell things off so that they could remain in power while, you know, the common man got nothing. So it's only would seem logical that then they would band together and revolt against the government again, like what's happening here. So I mean, yeah, it's just it's interesting. Karl Marx originally first saw the workers of the Western nations starting a revolution, not Russia.
Short but fierce fight, the strikers succeed in entering the site of the town hall and the prefecture and proclaim the creation of the revolutionary Commune of Lille. Inspired by the revolutions in Lille and Paris, other nearby communes follow swiftly. By the start of 1920, French communal forces start skirmishes with the French Republican Army all over France. Revolutionary communes are created in Lille, Limoges, and Marseille, while the department...
It's also interesting that, you know, even though Germany essentially defeated France, France hasn't been defeated, and it's the outcome looks like it might not end up going in Germans' favor. Like, yeah. Because the socialist groups rising up, taking power, and the whole point is that they don't want to be under German rule, and they're going to end up creating potentially a more unified system that's going to fight against them than what was in France to begin with. So that's also another interesting factor that's happening here.
The government of Var in southern France also turns red. These militias, revolutionary fighting forces of the communes, are formed of convinced socialists, adventurers, and veterans of war. Such armed bands will be the forebearer of the revolution.
And I mean, yeah, that's the other thing too. You're going to have groups of war veterans or just hardcore soldiers that don't like the idea of having lost to Germany and wanting to live under that kind of rule, and will take any opportunity they can get to fight back.
Going from town to town to spread socialist ideals and convince the people that the Republican government is lost. By February that year, the loyalist Dumerge government, now seated in Orléans, launches a large offensive against the growing Red Menace, hoping to retake the capital from the Commune of Paris and thus deal a major blow to the revolution. The Commune of Paris slowly begins taking over nearby communes to prepare for this attack, forming an organized militia to meet the government in open battle. Militia forces and the government clash at Linat, a key junction in the main road to Paris. Militia forces ambush the government by flanking them from Rambouillet and the passages near Sénart, and government forces are crushed. The victory at Linat is celebrated in Paris as a symbol of the inevitable victory of the revolution. Paris has taken the initiative and declares her intent to create a federation of the communes of France later that year. Pressured by revolutionary attacks, the other communes join Paris to create a unified executive board. It will take until the fateful date of May 1st, 1920, however, to officially ratify the so-called Federation of the Communes of France. The new government declares itself the successor of the French Third Republic. She is colloquially referred to as the Commune of France.
There it is. There's the title of the episode.
Camarades, brother, friends.
It's interesting how comrades becomes a French term here too. I like that.
Stand with me now, as we light a torch that will cast light upon the whole world. Bear witness to a new form of state, a not just form of governance. France belongs to her people now, a France for and by the worker. Hear me, workers of the world. From the blazing light of France to the capitals of the world, we submit this to you now. You have nothing to lose but your chains. The government that claims control over you is corrupt, weak, and frightened by our revolution. They will try to shield the truth from you and tell you that we are radicals, revolutionaries, dangerous rabble. But the blood in your veins, as does mine, runs deepest red. You know this in your heart, that the only path to salvation is throwing off the yoke of the capitalist, the Pope, and the autocrat. That those who feed you lies do so only to keep you complacent. Complacent because they fear you, workers of the world. For they are few, and we are billions. I implore you, workers of London, of Berlin, of Rome, of the whole world, take up arms against your unlawful repression. Camarades, break your chains.
Vive la France!
By the end of March, communard forces push past the forests of Rambouillet and into the Republican heartland. The north of France is consolidated, and other offensives confidently chip away at the Republic's territory. A final push toward Orléans spells doom for the Republican government.
It's interesting, too, that we're not hearing much of what the Germans think of or are doing about this at the time. I assume that they're just allowing this to happen, thinking that it's going to cause more collapse and be easier for them to then, again, take over and renegotiate whatever kind of terms they want to have from previous treaties.
Capital. The government, parliament, and high command decide to evacuate to Nantes in the west of France. As the government flees...
And I mean, it would kind of make sense because Germany's still kind of recovering from the war at this point. They're trying to, I'm sure, consolidate their own things, recover, get things going in the new territories that they've seized from France, the various colonies, and trying to get all that stuff going properly. So they have probably their own logistical issues and things that they're trying to settle at this moment, and are, I would assume, not wanting to get involved in this as much as more as wait and see what's going to happen.
West, the resulting chaos and lack of...
Why spend more resources and manpower getting involved in something when you can wait and see what the outcome is, and then, get involved if necessary at that point.
Orders means many army regiments and mid-level officers decide to surrender or defect to the syndicalist cause. By the time the government arrives at their new capital, they learn that most of the country has already fallen to Red forces. By this point, Doumergue's panicking government realizes the war is lost and commands Field Marshals Pétain and Foch to help escort the military and remaining loyalists across the Mediterranean. The government hopes to continue the fight from Algeria, where many loyalist Pieds Noirs have managed to fend off all traces of leftist agitation. Pétain and Foch debate this plan fiercely, agitating for continuing the war in the mainland against what they consider traitorous rabble. But they're overturned. The government sails south, where they will remain until the end of the war. This motley collection of loyalist armed forces and old government institutions would form the basis of a government in exile that would challenge the Commune of France's legitimacy over metropolitan France. This new republican government was shaky at best, and would later collapse under tensions between the Pieds Noir colonists and exiles. The instability would lead to a military takeover under Philippe Pétain in 1926, turning the republican rump state into a thinly veiled military junta. These troubled remnants would later be referred to as National France. Whatever loyalists remain in mainland France are now trapped. Many army elements see the writing on the wall and begin surrendering. For communard forces, it is now simply a matter of conquering loyalist holdouts one by one. The last bastion of the loyalists, Nantes, falls at the end of summer on September 29th. France is now fully under the control of the Commune. Celebrations break out when the news reaches Paris. In a fit of revolutionary fervor, young radicals set the Sacré-Cœur Basilica on fire that evening. As the church blazes into the night like a massive bonfire, crowds gather around the collapsing structure as a symbol of the destruction of the old order and a herald of what is to come. These radicals proclaim that never again the workers will be insulted, and a new socialist building will be erected where the church once stood. While the communard government later condemns this vandalism, at least officially, few in the city seem to be bothered by this wanton destruction. On June the 7th, 1920, the Commune of France manages to secure a peace for the border conflict between her and Germany. The Commune government promises to respect the territorial changes of the Treaty of Versailles and is recognized in return by the German Empire as the legitimate French state. Germany is contented by this revolution, thinking her former rival France has now fully collapsed into anarchy and will never recover to challenge Germany again. The German Empire hates,
which more than likely is going to be a mistake, and the opposite's going to happen, as France is just going to consolidate and eventually build back up and probably revolt and spark, war against Germany when it's a very unopportune time for German forces, I would assume.
Hastily signs the treaties, distracted in Eastern Europe and Africa with conflicts resulting from her rapid absorption of colonies. Only 2 years after crushing defeat in the Weltkrieg, France appears young and energetic, set against the victorious but groaning German Empire. In those years, France's defiant revolution spreads across Europe. Berlin watches with trepidation as Italy is torn between Republican and syndicalist factions, and Britain expels the royal family, declaring a syndicalist union of Britain. In Germany's...
So, French almost, this revolution almost causes France to unify Italy and Britain under this new kind of socialism. That would spark a lot of problems for Germany, you would think, right?
Republican and syndicalist factions, and Britain expels the royal family, declaring a syndicalist union of Britain. In Germany's new overseas territories, chaos and pandemonium spread as Germany struggles to control her bloating and expanding empire, while still recovering from the Great War herself. This new age would bring peace for Germany, but a tenuous one. Over the years, revanchist factions would claim dominion over her Western syndicalist neighbors.
That's what I was thinking. It's like, this is not good for America, because that's just going to cause... we're just going to be isolated, essentially. We're just going to be isolated here in our own country while all these factions are kind of taking over and running amok in Europe. It's almost like we should have entered the war earlier when we had a chance and done something about it. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the France is the Red Horde in this timeline. It seems like it.
Effectively put an end to Germany's hopes for a peaceful process of European integration under her rule. Before long, France and Britain would begin rearming and breaking the force limit clauses of the treaties of Versailles. In 1926, France and Britain host the 5th Congress of the Third Internationale. There, they announced the formation of a military alliance between the two syndicalist powers, promising a new world alliance of the workers to oppose the German Empire. Germany, from her side, was forced to cobble together what allies she could carve out of her contested territories with Russia. These young Eastern European states, led by German...
Yeah, I mean, Germany hasn't had enough... It's interesting how this has happened, right? Like, Germany is the victor of the war. France was in total collapse. But now France is reunited and become a stronger nation, while also spreading their ideals throughout bigger nations in Europe, and having now created a united front against what was the victorious Germany, but one that is still not recovered from the war, and is still trying to consolidate her territories and resources, and quell various uprisings that might be happening in other parts of the world. So now Germany is in a worse potential position should an uprising happen, which is looking more and more likely that, yeah, this, you know, the French and now the socialist France and Britain are going to rise up against Germany.
Princes and nobles would form a faction called Mitteleuropa, uniting the monarchies of Europe in a bid to stand against the revolutionary theory of syndicalism. To complicate matters further, old remnants of the Entente remained in rump states and governments in exile around the world. They too eyed their old territory with hungry eyes, and still had many loyal followers on the mainland. By the beginning of the 1930s, new battle lines were being drawn in Europe, and in the hearts of populations worldwide. The world revolution began spreading to America, Russia, Asia, and further yet.
Damn, socialism be spreading, yo.
Once more, soldiers manned fortified borders between Germany and France. Cannons pointed in all directions. The old grievances of the Great War were never settled, and were now enhanced with revolutionary fervor against the idea of empire.
So, World War II is about to happen. That's what they're going toward here.
Empire and monarchy. Slowly,
yeah, for
the
real.
Internationale and Mitteleuropa began preparing for another all-out war, with the Entente biding its time.
So, I mean, it looks like, according to this map, there's like 3 major world alliances. There's like the Entente, the blue, there's the German factions, and then there's the socialist uprisings. And then everything else is like neutral right now. That seems to be what's leading into World War II. Are these 3, like, you know, I guess superpowers, or just these 3 main factions with their different ideologies about to fight against each other? With the Entente wanting to seize their territory back, Germany obviously wanting to hold on to what they have, and the socialist uprising wanting to spread throughout the world.
Idea of empire and monarchy. Slowly, the Internationale and Mitteleuropa began preparing for another all-out war, with the Entente biding its time. Germany, so confident in her last victory, had grown uncertain. Her growth and ambition were taking a toll on the empire, and rumblings of an American syndicalist revolution sparked threats of a massive syndicalist superpower rising across the Atlantic.
Yeah.
The war would begin with cloak and dagger, as Germany attempted to subvert and secure political allies in conflicts all around the globe. Everywhere, the groaning masses of laborers were rallied into revolution. Even at home, German trade unions were inspired into strikes and subversions of the Kaiser's power. Seeing these troubles in Europe, the German elites tremble. To secure her future in the world, Germany would have to face a new breed of enemy. A Red Dawn over Europe.
Which is a great movie, by the way, okay? Like, I know it's a little cheesy, but if you've never seen it, the 80s Red Dawn with Patrick Swayze and Charlie Sheen, super good movie. Wolverines, okay? Definitely watch it. But anyway, let's finish up this.
To be continued.
Okay.
Wait, they're listening with the audio on.
Okay, well, there we go. That was part 2 in this Kaiserreich Universe documentary, Commune of France. And it's super interesting just seeing how in detail these historical turns are in this scenario, and how, you know, communism and socialism essentially rose up in the heart of Europe instead of in Russia, where the, you know, Lenin uprising was quelled in Russia, and they stayed democratic, and they stayed a republic, whereas Germany, being victorious in the war, and essentially gaining control over Central Europe, then led to a revolution in France that sparked socialism that seems to be spreading through like wildfire throughout the world. And it's setting the stage for World War II between essentially these three main factions, you know, with Germany and its empire wanting to obviously hold on to its territories and holdings against the I guess the remnants of what used to be the French and British governments, the Entente, you know, that alliance that they had, which seems to be, you know, Canada, big parts of Africa and Australia, and then essentially a massive portion of the world has started to turn to socialism in this scenario, and it's super fascinating to see. Next episode's about Britain, I'm pretty sure. Cool. It really is super fascinating just to go through and see how these historical events have taken place in these different times, and what seems to be, you know, foreshadowing what's going to happen in essentially the Second World War this time. Also not sure that I'll handle the canonicity, whatever. How they're gonna you know, but I remember that one of the events that can happen in the mod is that German and the Entente ally against the socialists. I mean, I could see that happening too, for sure, because the socialist uprising is spreading like wildfire at this time in this scenario, and it's literally like taking over the world. I mean, should the entirety of the United States chain, you know, switch over to the socialist ideal, that plus the heart of France and well, I mean, it's really kind of like the heart of Europe, right? Italy through France up to Great Britain, you know, and then all of that plus the United States, and then parts of South America. Like that's pretty big. That's a lot of resources and a lot of power. So I could definitely see them forming an alliance against that. So, but yeah, so that was Kaiserreich Universe Documentary Episode 2, Commune of France, by Kaiser Cat Cinema. You know, going into showing how the socialist movement took place in the heart of Europe, and you know, how even though Germany essentially won the First World War and came to power, it didn't turn out as they wanted, essentially. So it's gonna be interesting to see what happens in the next episodes here with with what I guess is going to go into what happens to Britain. So, but yeah, links down below, as always, to the original video without my commentary and reaction, and to Kaiser Cat Cinema's channel. If you enjoyed this, you know, consider going over there and give it a like. And if you're enjoying this documentary series, go over there and give Kaiser Cat Cinema a sub. If you'd like to join us when we do this reactions live, as we're doing now, there is a join button underneath the video, as well as a link in the description to the YouTube membership benefits and tiers that I offer. If you've been around the channel for a while and decide you want to take your support to the next level, you can check those out. You can get early access to videos, priority any kind of reaction requests you might have, etc., etc. So just check those out and see if any of that would interest you. But that's going to do it for this one, guys. Thank you for watching. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy day to watch the video. Hope you enjoyed it. If you did, consider leaving a like and a sub, as it helps me and the channel grow. And we'll see you guys on the next one. Have a wonderful night, everyone.